Mary Schroeder, and we are extension educators in health and nutrition with the University of Minnesota Extension. And we are part of a team that is hosting webinars with a family focus, including this family-friendly Earth Care series. I also would like to shout out and thank Sherry Schmidt, who is our webinar producer today. And Sherry, I think you've started the recording, is that right? And
yes.
Thank you so much. And we will be, she will be putting in some things in the chat for us as we are going along. It's so exciting to see so many people from all over the United States, but all over Minnesota as well. So thank you so much for putting those things into the chat. We'll share that chat list with you as well. So today we will identify the basics of a plant-based diet, and then we'll identify simple strategies to increase your consumption of plant-based foods. So that is our goal for the day. And to start us off, we have a poll, and Sherry's going to launch our poll for us now. And it is about your current knowledge of plant-based diets. So where are you in your current knowledge? And so if you can please answer, thinking about moving to a more plant-based diet, starting to use more plant-based foods, expert in plant-based foods, or other.
I think I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and then share the results here. And it looks like most people, it's kind of like a mix here. We have most people are planning on starting to use a more plant-based foods, starting kind of in there. Some people are just starting to think about it. We have a few people who feel like they are kind of experts in that area. So as we go through our presentation today, we'll be hearing a little bit more about plant-based diets, and we know people are all over the spectrum in terms of this, and we're looking forward to really spending some time at the end to hear your ideas of what you've been doing. So for those of you who are starting to move more towards a plant-based diet and have had tried some new things, what have you tried that's worked well? What are some tips that you might have for others? And maybe for those of you who really feel like you're experts and have a lot of knowledge in this area, what are some good resources that you have, or real recipes that you have found that work really well that you think others might like? And finally, for those of you who are just kind of starting to think a little bit more about, this is maybe something I want to do, maybe what are some questions that you might have, or where are places where maybe you're kind of running into a few of those barriers and transitioning over to a more plant-based diet. So we'll allow time at the end for you to share ideas. And again, if you think of something as we're going through, feel free to put it in the chat and we can kind of pick it up as we go along. So next slide. So I'm going to start talking a little bit about just some basics of some plant-based diets. And it's important to remember that it is more than just fruits and vegetables. A lot of times we think of plants and we think our mind first goes to those fruits and vegetables. But when we're talking about a plant-based diet, we really are talking about any type of plant. So there's kind of 4 general categories that we can look at. We have the grain category, which would include things like wheat and corn, brown rice. Those are examples of some of the grains that you might have in the plant-based diet. And again, those products can be used in a variety of different ways. For example, wheat can be used to make bread. It can be used to make other type of grain products. So it can really be used in a variety of different ways. We also have the beans and legumes, which may include things like kidney beans, black beans, mature peas, lentils. They're included in that group. We also have the seeds and nuts, which would be things like cashews, sunflower seeds, peanuts. Those would all be in our nuts and seed group. And then finally, the fruits and vegetables, which is the one we're probably most familiar with because it would be things like asparagus, oranges, apples, limes, lemons, really anything along that line of the fruits and vegetables. As we go through our plant-based diet today, we're not going to get real hung up on, is it tomato, is it a fruit, or is it a vegetable, is it peanut, a legume, or is it a nut? We really just kind of put this up here so that you have a general idea of just different places that you can start to pull from to make a plant-based diet. It doesn't have to, again, and you don't want it just to be all fruits and vegetables because you need that variety of different nutrients that come from those different types of categories. So next slide. I also want to mention as we move towards a more plant-based diet, it's not an all or nothing. You don't need to either be like, oh, I eat meat in my diet, or all, I'm completely plant-based. It really depends upon the spectrum and where you want to be and why you're choosing that. I actually grew up on a beef farm. So I grew up having a lot of beef and a lot of meat. And now I have a teen daughter who is really interested in decreasing our carbon footprint because she's very concerned about the environment. So we are moving towards a more plant-based diet. I myself, because I have kind of grown up on the meat, I've had a hard time to transition completely over to an all plant-based diet. So I kind of fall here in the middle of, I definitely have more of the plant-based foods as the primary part of my diet, but I still incorporate smaller amounts of meat throughout the day and for different meals. But it's been really fun with my teen daughter to kind of try some of the different things to move to more plant-based diets. We've enjoyed doing that. So next slide. And there's also a variety of reasons that people move towards a plant-based diet. We're really referring it to a more of a plant-based diet versus a vegetarian diet, because again, we're talking, there might be times when you do incorporate some type of meat or maybe some eggs or dairy products. So that's why we're kind of using the term plant-based instead of vegetarian. But there's a variety of different reasons why people might choose to do a more plant-based diet. Some people, it's because maybe religious reasons, health concerns, animal welfare. Today, we're really just gonna, because our series is family earth-friendly care, we're really focusing on the environmental reasons or the climate reasons of why we might want to move toward a more plant-based diet. And the two main reasons are kind of if you move to a more plant-based diet, it's decreased carbon emissions and also decreased water usage. And you could spend a whole week studying all about the different things related to decreasing the carbon and why it uses more carbon to have animal products. We're going to focus more today on just these are the reasons why we want to move to a more plant-based diet and spend more of our time really focusing on what are some strategies to move towards that plant-based versus getting really hung up on the science piece of this. So next slide. But just to kind of give you an idea of how much of a difference it can make, researchers have found that animal products take significantly more water to get from the animal product, to your table. So for example, here we have a pound of ground beef and a pound of tofu. And for those of you who aren't familiar with tofu, tofu is made from soybeans. And they estimate that the water that it takes to produce a pound of ground beef is about 2,000 to 8,000 gallons of water. Again, they're looking at the water that's inputted in terms of the rain that is needed in terms to get the grass or the corn to grow, and then the water that the cattle will need to drink while they are alive and well, and then also the water that's needed to process the meat. So that whole thing takes about 2,000 to 8,000 gallons of water, whereas the tofu only takes about 302 gallons of water to produce from the growing of the soybeans till it's produced into the tofu. So again, you can see the difference there, and there's similar things related to the carbon, but we're just focusing on the water for this example. So next slide. Okay. So a question a lot of people have is, what about nutrition? If I move to a plant-based diet, am I going to get all the nutrients that I need? And the answer is yes, you can do it. Sometimes it takes a little bit more work depending upon how far plant-based you go. So we're going to go through and kind of give you some examples of things that people might have questions on when it comes to the diet. So next slide. So the one that people think of quite often is protein. Am I going to get enough protein? And that is something many people in the United States are really concerned about, is, am I going to get enough protein? And we tend to, in the United States, just automatically get more protein than we need. And there's a variety of different reasons for that, but that is usually not a challenge in the United States, except for one group, and that is the older adults, people 70 and older. About 30% of the males and 50% of the females actually are lacking on protein. So if you are an older adult, it's especially important that you really maybe pay specific attention to making sure that you are getting enough protein. On the side here, I do have how many grams of protein that you need a day, so you can kind of get an idea where it would fall. So if you look at this chart, you can see the protein content of some of our different foods. So on the bottom, we have the animal-based products. So we have milk, which is about half a cup, is about 8 grams. Ground beef, 16 grams. A chicken breast, about 16 grams. And also included tuna in there, and that's about 10 grams. And that's considered, you know, kind of what we would have for like a serving of something. I guess the ground beef, it's probably a serving might actually be more like a fourth of a cup. A half a cup of just ground beef would be quite a bit. And then you can go up to the top and you can see our plant-based products. And most of those kind of average about half a cup, around 8 grams. And you might be thinking, well, that doesn't really seem like a lot. How am I going to get up to the total amount of protein that I need? But actually, if you start looking at a whole daily intake, it isn't too hard to do. For example, if you start with like a peanut butter toast and have that on bread and a half a glass of milk, that's going to get you up to 20 grams of protein just at breakfast. So again, you can see how quickly those numbers add up. If you include things like your dairy products and your eggs, it's again a little bit easier to get the protein than it is if you go completely using your beans and legumes and nuts and seeds. Still very possible to do it. You might just have to pay a little bit closer attention. But again, the good news is it's not, you can definitely get the protein content that you need. So next slide. Wanted to talk a little bit about kind of the plant-based beverages. So some people, like I mentioned before, may decide that they don't want to do dairy. They want to really just go 100% plant-based. So they might choose a different type of beverage instead of your dairy milk. They might choose a beverage that's made either from soy, nuts, or grains. And again, they grind it down to kind of a liquid form. And typically, soy milk has a similar protein content as what milk does, but it does not naturally contain the calcium. So most manufacturers fortify it with calcium. So when we look and compare the two, the dairy milk to a soy beverage, they're quite the same nutrition-wise. And actually, WIC will allow people to use soy milk. They can credit that towards their dairy if they don't want to have dairy. So that they said is a close nutrition comparison. The other milks, things such like as your almond and oat milk, those do not contain as much protein. So they've been fortified with calcium, but because the protein content is lower, WIC does not allow that to be purchased instead of the dairy milk if you're on the WIC program. Again, I just like to mention that because you can kind of see the difference then between that protein content and how it is a little bit different. I'm not saying that the nut and the oat grain milks are bad, just that you have to pay a little bit more attention to make sure you're getting the protein that you need. And with all of these, again, make sure that you are checking to make sure they've been fortified, like with the calcium. Okay, B12 is another nutrient of concern. Primarily, if you go completely animal-free, no eggs and no milk, just make sure that you're looking for foods that are either fortified with B12 or take a B12 supplement. So next slide. Food costs. This one can be a little bit variable because it really depends upon what you do. If you have just a basic meat diet and then a really fancy gourmet plant-based diet, your plant-based diet could actually be more than what a basic meat diet would be. And kind of the opposite too, you could have a very basic plant-based diet or a very expensive meat diet. So it kind of depends upon where you're at and what kind of food choices that you choose to make. Also, if you kind of choose more just basic plant foods versus a lot of things that have been more processed, that's going to be cheaper because the more it's processed, typically, you know, the higher the cost that gets added to that. So next slide. So as you start moving towards a plant-based diet, there's a couple different things that you can do. And again, it all depends upon if you want to move quickly or slowly. Just start by making half your plate fruits and vegetables. Most of us don't get enough fruits and vegetables just in general. So that's a great way to get started. You can start with 1 meal a week. We've all heard about the Meatless Monday campaign, just kind of a fun way to get people to think about what are some different things I can do on Mondays to go meatless. And also replacing meats with protein-based foods. So if you have, like, I have a lasagna recipe, instead of using ground beef in it, we put kidney beans and it tastes really good. And it's a very simple way to move towards a plant-based diet. If you start with like that 1 meal a week, you can gradually increase those numbers of plant-based meals. And I think the most exciting thing is really just trying easy plant-based recipes. There's lots of different options out there. And Kelly is going to tell us about all the different resources that you can use to really get started on that plant-based diet.
Thank you, Mary. So yeah, we're going to talk next about cooking and some recipe resources. And we'd really like to highlight 3 sites, and you will be getting those sites in a handout later on with a follow-up email. So we'll be sending you all the links to the recipes and to the sites that we're talking about after our webinar today. The first one I want to talk about is myplate.gov. And they have a part on myplate.gov called My Plate Kitchen. And it is a great place to look for plant-based recipes. They're listed under vegetarian diet recipes, and we, as Mary shared, not all vegetarian recipes are green, but most are plant-based, but most of them are. And so it's a great place to look. They have over 700 vegetarian recipes, and it includes entrees and side dishes and even desserts. And it's a great place to search for different recipes and just get some inspiration on what you'd like to make with your plant-based diet. Another site is Oregon State University's Food Hero. And we really like this site because you can search by recipe or by ingredient, but you want to go, if looking for the vegetarian diets, you want to go to this site, to the recipe categories, and it's under special diets. And so you'll find a whole bunch of different recipes for that area. And it's very simple recipes to get started. And then this third site that we'd like to highlight is Real Life Good Food with the University of Minnesota Extension. And if you go to the part that says cook, you will find all kinds of recipes, including plant-based recipes that you can try for you and your family. So just focusing on a few different plant-based proteins that Mary was talking about, we're going to start with beans. And many of you already cook with beans, and it's a great place to start. It's a great protein food. Now, growing up in Minnesota, we didn't eat a lot of beans. It was we were more of a meat and potato family. And so I remember the one bean that we did eat in our household was kidney beans, canned kidney beans. And we had the recipe had 4 ingredients: a canned kidney beans, a pound of hamburger, a can of tomato soup, and maybe sometimes an onion, sometimes just onion powder. And that was really exotic in that day and age, and using those canned kidney beans. And it was, it's something I still use today, but I do season it a little bit more. I do use a little bit more spice than the very bland recipe that we had. But it was, something that we grew up with. It was a kidney bean, but now if you go to the store, you can find so many different kinds of beans available, both dried and canned. And so if you have a chance, just type into the chat some of the beans that you might use today in the cooking that you do. So dried beans are probably the most economical. It's usually cheaper. Canned beans, much more convenient and easy to use. All you have to do is open the can. When you do use dry beans, you're going to want to open the package, sort them, wash them and sort them, and take out anything dry or any stones. I find that if I go to the dollar store, some cheaper sites to go for beans, there tends to be a little more debris in the bean than if I go to the store and buy a little more expensive brand, but that's just me. But it's really, what I do is I'll rinse them, and then I'll put them on a cookie sheet with a ridge so that I can just kind of sort them out and make sure that there's nothing in there that I don't want. You're going to need to soak your beans, and we'll send you the instructions on how to soak your beans in that handout. But there's 2 main types of ways to soak beans. One is a quick soak, where you put them in a pan, bring them to a boil, boil them for 2 minutes, turn off the heat, cover them, and set them aside for at least an hour. The other option is to soak them overnight, at least 8 hours, and covered. And they turn out perfectly that way. And then you can cook them. So some things that you can use beans in. Beans are great in soups and stews and casseroles and salads. We often think we need to have some kind of protein on a salad, and that bean can be that perfect protein. Kidney beans can be replaced, as Mary said, she uses hers with lasagna. And so where you might use ground beef, you could use a kidney bean. Try meatless chili, and my family will make chili with red kidney beans and red dark and light kidney beans, just for variety in how we look at the beans. And then black beans are really great in any kind of Southwestern type style dish. And so it's a lot of fun. And I'm seeing some Instant Pot suggestions as another way to soak beans. Thank you. That's certainly another way to soak those beans quickly. So here's some recipes that Mary's family uses. And the one in the top left is a cheese chicken enchilada bake. And you're going, wait a second, chicken. But you can take that chicken out and you can just have it, just the beans and black, it includes black beans and chicken. So you can just have the black beans if you'd like. The middle one is a bean and rice burrito, and it does not have meat. The recipe, Mary says, calls for kidney beans, but she prefers the black beans in this recipe. And then bean soups. Bean soups are another great way to get protein in your diet, very filling. My plate has 25 plant-based soup recipes. So if you go to that site, you will find all kinds of recipes. You can take a current recipe that you might have and take the meat out and add a bean instead. And that's another choice. Next, I want to talk about lentils. And lentils don't need soaking, but they still need the same process as the dried beans. You're going to want to rinse them, and then you're going to want to sort them so that you don't have any stones or stalks in the lentils. Be sure when you look at your colander how big the holes are, because lentils can go through the colander holes that are large. I like to use a colander that's more of a screen type of colander so that I don't lose most of the lentils down the sink. You want to be sure to rinse them. Lentils come in a lot of different colors. You can get green or brown, red lentils. There's kind of a coral colored lentil. It's really fun to see, even black lentils. And black lentils have the highest protein amount than all the other lentils. It really depends upon what your dish is. And so using it appropriately, what type, because they have some different features. The green and the brown hold their texture more, and so they will stay firm when you cook. The red lentils, especially over a long extended cooking period, will kind of get a little mushier, and you won't see the defined lentil in the cooked dish. It's more of a texture part of it. They do need to be cooked, depending on the lentil, about 20 to 30 minutes. And sometimes that's built right into the recipe itself. You can use them for soups. And I see somebody made pasta, red lentil pasta. And that's another option. Stews as well as curries, different ethnic foods include lentils, and about 1/4 cup cooked lentils equals 1 ounce equivalent for protein. So this recipe is one that I made from, this one came from My Plate Kitchen, and it's a curried potato and red lentil dish. 5 stars for me out of 5. It was very good. It included sweet potato and regular potato and red lentils. And the dish wouldn't have been the same if I would have used brown or green, because they would have been very noticeable, but they added kind of that texture. It included coconut milk, and I bought it at the dollar store, a can of coconut milk for $1. And so I will say with this recipe, it's a lot. It's a lot of food for this recipe, especially for 2 people in the household. And it's something that you could freeze, but planning on just using it a little bit throughout the week. The next protein source to talk about is tofu. And tofu is made from soybeans, and it's made by coagulating fresh soybeans into curds, kind of like that whole cheese process of taking milk, cow's milk, and curding it to make cheese. And there's two main types. There's the regular and then the silken. And the regular can be firm or extra firm or medium. This is kind of an example of a firm tofu. It'll come in a package with liquid, and you'll rinse off that, drain the liquid and rinse off the tofu to use. And it can be used for grilling. It can be used for different soups and stews in place of meat. The silken really works well for smoothies, and it's got a softer texture. One thing about tofu is it really doesn't have a taste. It's kind of bland. And so it absorbs the flavors around it. And so whatever you make, if it's a spicy dish, it will taste spicy. One of my favorite things, especially for firm tofu, is hot and sour soup. And it takes on that spiciness of the hot and sour soup. It's kind of that sponge of the food world to take on flavors. One dish that I made was a dessert using tofu, and you'll find this in Food Hero, and it's a banana pudding, and 4 ingredients: bananas, tofu, and vanilla and sugar. And you wouldn't really even need the sugar at all, but it adds a little to it. I did add a little bit of lemon juice when I pureed the bananas, because I didn't want the bananas to turn brown. Bananas oxidize so quickly, and so that helps to prevent that oxidation. But if you don't mind, you don't need it. Or if it does turn brown, you can put a little cinnamon on the top and then cover up that brown flavor. But it has a wonderful taste and texture. If you're trying to eliminate dairy from your diet, it's a nice way of having pudding, because most puddings do have a dairy base to it. And so it's a great recipe. So what else? What else can we do? So plant-based isn't just for the main entree, as I just shared. It can be a dessert. But here's some ideas. Pizza, and maybe instead of having a meat pizza, it is a vegetable pizza. You could use quesadillas instead of chicken or meat. You could use other meats. You could use black beans. The one on the upper right-hand corner is peanut butter, and that's another great protein source. Any kind of nut butters can provide that protein with apples. The bottom left hand is a casserole, a vegetable casserole. And then the bottom middle is a smoothie. And then the other corner is the soups that can really help to incorporate more plant-based into your diet. Now, one of the questions that we had on our registration was about what my toddler, how can I get my toddler into plant-based foods? And all of the recipes that we have talked about, all of the sources of the plant-based are toddler friendly. Just making sure that they're bite-sized, that they're not something that the child can choke on. In fact, beans can be a perfect finger food and help with those fine motor skills. Making sure that the vegetables are cooked to tender so that they're easy to chew and not to be choked on. And then just a reminder that children under the age of 1 shouldn't have honey because of the risk of honey botulism. And so it's very possible to have those toddlers eating the exact foods that you're eating, and there are plant-based foods are very toddler friendly. So what is your next step to a more plant-based diet? Mary and I are curious into what types of things you might be trying after we've talked a bit. And so please feel free to put that into the chat, some of the ideas that you might have in incorporating more plant-based things into your diet. And as you do that, Sherry is going to be putting into the chat the evaluation. And so if you could be sure to fill out for Mary and I the evaluation, that gives us ideas on what we can do to improve, what are some topics that you are interested in. When you click into that evaluation, you'll want to go down and say, click on the increasing plant-based foods in your diet class so that we know that's the one that you attended. And we greatly appreciate that. Thank you, Sherry. We have a number of upcoming webinars, still 4 more within the Family Friendly Earth Care series on reducing food waste, on edibles and decoratives from the woods or backyard. We're going to talk about food composting 101 and reducing your family's carbon footprint. Other webinars that we have include talks in Spanish, and then we have the Finding Balance, Making Sense of It All, No Place Like Home, Recovery and Health, and then we have some standalone webinars as well, and we will be sure to include those in that handout. Great to see some of the things that you're going to be doing, the kidney beans instead of ground meat. Excited on trying the new webinars. I love the idea of kidney beans lasagna. Great. Good information. Thank you.
Kelly, there was a question in there about complete and incomplete protein. So I will just maybe answer that question if that's all right. So when we talk about proteins are really built of amino acids. So there's all sorts of different like amino acids, and then they link together and they make the protein. So we have what's called complete proteins, which can contain all the different amino acids. And then we have incomplete proteins, which don't contain all of them. And back when I went to dietetic school, there was a lot of focus on what's a complete and what's an incomplete protein. And they talked a lot more about making sure you have rice and beans at the same time, because that will make sure that you get all those amino acids that you need. The thought of that has changed a little bit, and now it's more in terms of what you get for your entire day, that your body is able to take amino acids from different foods at different meals and reconstruct it to make what it needs. So that's why it's important as you move towards a more plant-based diet that you kind of think of those 4 categories that we talked about earlier. And you're not just eating vegetables, you're not just eating, beans. You need to get that variety, because then you're going to make sure you're getting all those different amino acids or those building blocks that you need to make the full protein. So Kelly, did you have anything else to add with that?
Well, I think one of the things that always impresses me about those incomplete proteins and the missing amino acids is a lot of the things that we pair naturally make those connections, make the full amino acid set that we need, like peanut butter and whole wheat bread. Combined, it makes a complete protein. Beans and bread, or beans and tortilla shells. Those just are just some naturally occurring meals, kind of, that help to fill the need. So just another couple slides to be sure to engage with us and with the Center for Family Development. And there's a lot of different ways that you can do this, so please do so. And now we've got plenty of time where we can do some time to share. I really appreciated you sharing how, some of you were just thinking about becoming more plant-based, but some of you were really experts in that work. And so I think we can all learn from each other. And so I'm going to take it off of share. And if you want to turn on your cameras and unmute yourself, we've got some time just to share and talk. And I'd like to have someone start the conversation with people that have used that Instant Pot for soaking beans. I thought that was, I've done it, and I thought, well, tell us more about that. So feel free to unmute yourself.
My husband really likes his meat meals, but I try to, like, every other day or a couple of times during the week, make an all plant-based meal so he can still have his days where he gets some meat during the week.
That sounds like a perfect compromise.
And quinoa is also a complete protein. So that's another option for getting your protein.
Yeah, quinoa is really good, isn't it? And it cooks up quickly.
Yes.
And, bowls now are really popular. Rice bowls, bean bowls, and quinoa makes a really great bowl.
They're also good where you can make those bowls in the summertime because you can eat it cold with your fresh tomatoes from your garden and things like that, other vegetables. So that's kind of a nice summer dish that doesn't warm you up so much.
Yes, absolutely. So Mary, there's a question about those Impossible burgers. The types of, are they healthy or aren't they?
And I think like so many things, it really a lot of times depends. And they are nice. They're quick, they're easy, and they're very convenient. So if you don't have a lot of time, they are nice. And again, you have to really kind of look and compare different items, but the majority of them, I would say, are going to meet the nutritional needs. And it's hard to say, what's considered really like healthy, but, I would say they would be, a good, sorry, I'm stumbling over my words here. A nice option to choose at the grocery store if you're looking for something quick or if you're at a fast food restaurant. There's nothing unhealthy about them. As we talked about a little bit earlier, the more you process something or the more you the more convenient it is, unfortunately, sometimes, then the more impact it does have on the carbon emissions and also on the water usage. So again, sometimes you can kind of compare a little bit to, it's like, it still might be lower, it's still going to be lower than like maybe a beef hamburger. So that's something to keep in mind too, but it's going to have more carbon emissions than if you just took black beans and made your own black bean burger at home. So it's kind of that continuum of, I don't like to say it's good or it's bad. It's like, it just kind of depends upon your situation. If you have time and can make maybe a plant-based burger yourself, that might be your best choice. But if it's maybe between a hamburger and a plant-based burger, you might say, well, I'm going to go for the plant-based burger today. Or maybe you have the meat-based hamburger and just may have a smaller serving size of it too. So it really, I'm trying not to like make it too wishy-washy, but like so many things when it comes to food nowadays, you just kind of have to look at where you're at and what's working for you, what's working for your family, and kind of just try some of those different things. And with those, try different ones. You might try one brand and you like it, and the other brand is like, oh, this isn't something that I like. Same with the recipes. My daughter made a different tofu recipe last night, and I said, if you don't like that one, because it had a lot of soy sauce on it, and I didn't think she'd like it, I said, try a different one instead. Don't give up on it. And but she liked that one, so that was good. So
Yeah.
hopefully that kind of answered your question.
I think that answered it. And somebody said, just be sure, if your family is one that's watching your sodium intake, some of them are very high in sodium. And so just reading the labels for those, and then they tend to be more expensive too. So it might impact your whole household budget as a result. So it really does vary. Oh, I see James has his hand up. You have a question.
Yeah, hi everyone. Tofu has kind of a bad reputation, so I'm wondering if maybe you could talk a little bit more about tofu and some ways that people can use it. People might have it in their head that it's, not very good or tasteless or mushy or something like that. So what are some ways that we can use tofu and kind of overcome some of the bad reputation things that it has?
Thank you. That's a great question. And we even have in the chat, somebody saying tofu with half meat and half tofu, maybe kind of as a starter. I mentioned hot and sour soup, but it really can replace any meat in a casserole or a hot dish that you have. It can be put into soups, and it can be smoothed into a smoothie. It just really, I'm sad that it does get a bad reputation because it really is a versatile protein to have in your diet, and it really is good. And as Mary said, if you don't like this recipe, you might like this recipe. It's like with any kind of recipe, as you try it out, you might find some successes and some maybe ones you wouldn't make again. And so just being willing and receptive to trying different kinds. Janice says she puts it in small cubes of tofu in an air fryer to get it crisp before putting into recipes. What a great idea. Roasting is a great way. And roasting, you can roast tofu, but somebody shared the cruciferous vegetables like Brussels sprouts, broccoli, root vegetables, all are great tasting, and it tastes different. So for example, I'm not a fan of beets, cooked beets, but I am a fan of roasted beets because it really brings out the sugar in the roasting process. So if you don't like it one way in the cooking method, you might like it another way. And so trying that out. What a great question. Thank you.
I'll add too that the recipe that my daughter tried last night was one similar to, like someone said, putting the tofu in the air fryer. This recipe had you put it in the oven first and kind of bake it for like, cubed it up and then you baked it for like 30 minutes. Then you put it into a fried rice. But that one I really liked too, because it was cooked a little bit on the outside. It did tend to have a little bit more of the texture like chicken because it had that browned outside on it. So that I thought was kind of a neat addition to that recipe versus just putting it right into the stir fry. And I'll admit, we haven't used a lot of tofu in my family. I didn't have a real good experience my first try. So I have kind of avoided it too. So her interest in it has kind of spurred my interest now into, trying new recipes with it again. So it is good to encourage people to give it a try. So.
And we're getting some great ideas and suggestions. Thank you so much in the chat. Greatly appreciated. And we'll get you the copy of the chat too, so that you can get that information. And Sherry just put the evaluation in again. So please take a moment to fill out our evaluation.
Yeah, making sure you dry off the tofu. That's an important piece. Yep.
Thanks, Amy. That's great.
Yeah, I see this last comment and someone previous too talked about how we tend to put a lot of focus on the meat. So even just talking when we're planning our meal, if you put more focus on what you're going to have for your side dishes, and then the meat all of a sudden becomes more of the side dish versus the focus. That's a nice way to start to transition over to more of a plant-based diet too.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for attending today. Thank you, Sherry, for our web design. And we are done for the day. And we will be sending out that link.